There's a lot of fire spammers at legendary tier, but there's one that differs from every single other fire spammer, and that's because it's not a cruiser, but a destroyer, and its name is Khabarovsk. It's a fire spammer because there's a way you can build it to have the main battery range of a cruiser. It's arguably the way Khaba was meant to be played. While you have to worry about getting citadeled and spotted at 10 kilometers as a typical fire spamming cruiser, Khabarovsk eliminates both of those issues. Now, before we dive into the fire spamming build, let's go over the other way you could build this Russian destroyer. You could spec into its torpedoes by increasing the range, damage, and/or torpedo speed while equipping smoke. But the issue with this is there are multiple different destroyers that can do this job much better than a Torpedo Build, even if you have the best commanders and mods on. The Torps can't reach out as far as others, and they're the slowest at the tier, starting at only 58 knots. They do have the best torpedo detectability rating among her peers, starting at 0.6 kilometers. But the odds of sonar spotting them way beforehand from the countless ships that have it are pretty high, especially since you're more than likely going to get spotted due to Khabarovsk's abysmal 7.7 kilometer base concealment. All these factors make her a terrible torpedo boat. But what she lacks in torpedoes, Khaba makes up for in guns. Depending on the build, your guns can reach out from 12 to 15 kilometers. Its 130 millimeter guns will also pack a punch to any destroyer you see, but you'll still have to be wary of some. We'll talk about that in more detail later. The guns have a 5-second reload time and 8% base fire chance, but with my build, I have it at 10% right now. Her fires per minute numbers are decent, which put her in the middle of the pack compared to her DD peers. She lags behind the fire spamming cruisers, but that's to be expected, since all of them have way more guns than her, of course. Still, her numbers are formidable and enough to annoy any battleship commander you come across. Some other things that are important to point out are how Khaba has the highest number of hit points for any DD at the tier, which comes in handy if you get into a gunfight. She's also the second fastest legendary DD, only lagging behind Kleber by 1 knot with her base 44 knot speed. Now for the commander builds, I recommend picking between 2 as your base, and I'll explain why for each. With Von Essen, you'll get access to more heals and speed boosts, but your main battery range will be lower than the next commander's build. You'll have to be a few kilometers closer to rainfire down on battleships, although you'll be better equipped to take on a gunfight in exchange. Run Swirsky and Violet as inspirations to help with your concealment. The next base commander I recommend is Anton Gurin. You'll be able to get your main battery range to 14 kilometers starting off, and access to rather be torching legendary skill. Run Swirsky for better concealment, and Sims to get some health back you lost due to the glass cannon skill. This build will make you the ultimate range-dodging fire spammer, but at the cost of less consumables. This means you're better equipped to harass battleships, but have less utility to get yourself out of sticky situations if a cruiser or destroyer finds you in their sights. If you have the Rumble Commander, don't be afraid to run him as a substitute for one of these guys. As I pointed out previously, you're bound to get into gunfights with other destroyers eventually. It may be helpful to know the threat levels of those destroyers in a gunfight you'll come across. So I'm going to grade each of them and give a rating of either Class 1, 2, or 3. To clarify, these are just my opinions, so take this with a grain of salt. Also, I will be making these grades based off of Khabarovsk at the beginning of a match. So you may need to adjust the ratings to your experience accordingly. For example, if you encounter a Class 2 ship but have limited health and no heals left, consider them a Class 3 threat. We'll start with the Legendary tier and then do Tier 8 next. In the Class 1 category for Legendary, Shimakaze will be the only one you find yourself feeling relatively comfortable facing. Your guns will tear it apart, but make sure to be mindful of those torpedoes. I don't think I need to explain why. In the Class 2 category, ships here will be a fight, but can be winnable, especially if some factors are met going in. I'll explain why I put each ship in here, starting with Gearing. Gearing will be a tough fight solo, but you'll have the health advantage to level out the playing field. If you can hit your shots, they'll tear it apart since it's so large, but it can do the same to you with its faster fire rate, so be careful. Its rounds can shatter against your bow, but you'll lose a lot of your firepower, and if they adjust their shots to hit your superstructure, you'll have a bad day. If you don't have at least half the health of the gearings, run. Halland does have a high damage per minute as well, but half its artillery is in the back. So to get all of its potential damage on you, it has to expose itself and turn slightly broadside to you. You'll tear right through it. But if you can get some help from teammates, that would be preferable when facing Halland. It'll more than likely have less health than you, but try not to let him drag the fight out too long, or else you'll lose the little advantage you have. Finally, I put Clever here because even though it has a lot of health and big guns, they don't fire that fast. That being said, it does have reload boosters. So if Clever has one available to use, consider it a Class 3 threat. For Class 3, don't fight them solo at all costs. The longer a fight goes on, the lower your chances are for surviving the encounter. Seek help immediately if you come across one of these ships. First, Khabarovsk is a big threat to itself, so it's the first going in this category. Its guns, armor, and health all contribute to this being a tough fight. Next, Daring not only has great guns that turn 360 degrees, it also has sonar, heals, and the highest rounds per minute, at the tier for DDs. The typical strategy it will use is spot you first, engage, smoke up, and shoot at you while you're spotted by his other teammates to get extra shots on you without being threatened. It will heal up in its smoke, and then rinse and repeat until it loses a lot of health or dies. The other ship you have to be careful of is Kleber with its reload booster. Kleber has a lot of health and a lot of nice guns. Combine all three of those with speed, and you have one of the most threatening destroyers in the game, even after its nerf. If you're being attacked by one, use yourself as bait and lure it towards your allies to help take it down. Since there's a ton of Tier 8 ships, I'm going to run through them a little quicker than the legendaries. For Class 1, you have Z-44, Yugumo, and Chungmu. These ships, except the Chungmu, are not very good gunboats. Chungmu is here because it doesn't have the greatest health pool and deep water torps, which can't hit you. For Class 2, you have Adriatico, Smoland, Delny, New Strashimi, Sumner, Z-46, Kitakaze, Mogador, and Jutland. These ships will be a challenge to face, and they will for sure hurt you. Some of these ships even struggle to penetrate your bow armor too. However, the fight does lean more towards your side, but can quickly change the longer the fight pans out. For Class 3, you got Hayate, Schultz, and Elbing. Although you're a higher tier than these ships, Schultz and Elbing have a lot of health and big guns that can create a level playing field, if not higher than your own. Hayate is a very competitive gunboat at the tier, so consider her a big threat too. As I stated earlier, keep in mind these classifications can shift and change in game. Due to the threat of a lot of these destroyers, the odds of you being outspotted 99% of the time are pretty high. Add on top of this the radar ships being in every match. Charging into a cap immediately is usually not recommended, especially if you're alone or far away from your team. I'm not saying abandon the cap like us or the Russians in Afghanistan. Just don't charge in immediately. The cap is not your main priority, but if you think you really need a cap at the beginning, go in and try to use yourself as bait to lure the enemy DDs to shoot at you while being aware that torps may be on their way. If the enemy DD has taken the bait, allow your team to assist in damaging them as much as possible before they smoke up. The Khabarovsk is one of the more unique destroyers in the game due to its long-range fire spam build. While the torpedo build is available, it's not practical since there are better options. And when it comes to destroyers, there are some you should stay away from fighting alone, while others are easier to take out yourself. In 2024, the Khabarovsk didn't get too power crept on and is still a competitive pick, unlike some other ships in Legends. At the end of the day, Khabarovsk is guaranteed to cause fear in the minds of destroyer captains, mental anguish in battleship captains, while you can't help but smile as they turn into floating hunks of fire, metal, and pain, and frustrate anyone trying to shoot at you while you use your propulsion mod to cause them to completely miss and look like noobs. Like this.